Chapter 2. What's good about goodbye? Now, we have historians writing books that contend even before Pearl Harbor, things were already going downhill for the Axis. That American power made it all but certain the Allies would triumph, though no one in the U.S. was sure of victory then, least of all me, when I got my draft notice in April of 1943. Being drafted was only a formality. If I hadn't been notified, I would have enlisted. I was 19 now, a little older, a little wiser, but no less certain that it was my duty to fight so future generations could live in freedom and democracy. I would be saving my little corner of the world from Adolf Hitler and the Japanese invaders. I sincerely believe that there is one important detail that complicated things for me. I had met Elaine Wooler, the first serious girlfriend I'd ever had. Elaine's the shy, quiet type. She's always had the pretty, sparkling eyes, a smile that pure sunshine. We saw a lot of each other in the days before I went off to war. I still don't see much good about goodbyes. The day before I left, I went over to bid farewell to my Grandma Johnson, a woman I loved and admired. She wasn't in the best of health, and I held my hand for a long time. We both must have thought that more than likely we would never meet again in this life, but neither of us addressed that topic. That night, I said goodbye to another person whose hand I wanted to hold a long, long time. Elaine and I went out to listen to a polka band at a local dance hall and had a wonderful time. She was wearing this beautiful, soft, purple silk dress. We did the polka, the waltz, the Schottky. Wasn't lost on the fact that Elaine was a wonderful dancing partner, and it felt so good in my arms. It was a relief that night in my dreams and many times during the next few years. A neighbor kid interviewed Elaine, my wife of nearly 60 years now, and me for a school project a few years ago. I like how she explained our situation at that time. I hated to see him go. I knew I was falling in love. So what that we wanted to get married. Who cares about that? America has been attacked, and it's up to the boys like Gerald to defend us. After saying my goodbyes to Elaine, I didn't sleep much that night, but I was up early the next day so my parents could take me to the train station near Wittenberg. My father shook my hand and said he was proud of me, as any father would ever be for his son. My mother cried and hugged me until I was blushing red with embarrassment. She promised to write to me and tell me everything that happened, so I wouldn't miss out on the news and the local gossip back home. She made me promise not to be a hero and to write often so she wouldn't have to worry so much. I don't recall if she ever mentioned she'd keep a scrapbook during that time that I would be gone. The ride to Chicago wasn't much of an adventure, but arriving there was. I never had been what they call a shy town before. The sheer size of the city overwhelmed me. I didn't realize it then, but it was at the point that I was transformed from a unique and valued individual into a tiny, significant cog in America's war machine. Our destination was downtown historic Union Station, a huge marble building that had been the location of lots of movies, like the one I saw where Elliot Ness finally gets Al Capone. Inside the station was the stifling, teeming with soldiers and families saying hello and goodbye. No rousing farewells or welcome home ceremonies in 1943. We were just rounded up and herded like livestock aboard a troop train, headed to boot camp 1,000 miles away in Camp Croft, North Carolina. A last track of time on the trip to the East Coast. Mostly we napped, played cards, drank coffee, and talked smart. That false bravado didn't last long once we arrived on base. I'd never been so far from home in my life, and I caught my first case of homesickness. Wasn't alone. It was an epidemic. I managed to fight back the tears of loneliness, but some of the other men didn't. I was usually so exhausted from training that I fell asleep instantly, but on the nights I couldn't, I'd hear them crying, quietly, stifling in their pillows. Occasionally there was a loud sobbing, which we all politely passed off as some poor dog-face crying in his sleep. Most people know the term dog-face refers to the military slang in World War II, but I cannot tell you its diversion. If I was totally accurate, only infantry soldiers were referred to as dog faces. I read somewhere that the name came from the fact that we lived in pup tents, had dog tags for identification, and were treated like dogs by someone who outranked us. From basic training to combat duty, we were usually filthy, cold, wet, and smelly, but expected to instantly obey orders barked from the sergeant, meaner than junkyard dogs. The word found its most memorable expression in the beloved Pulitzer Prize-winning Bill Maudlin cartoons about Willie and Joe, two lovable doofus infantry soldiers. All I can say is that, from the very first day of basic training, I fit the description perfectly.